Welcome to Whisky Cast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 755 for February 17th, 2019. This time around, I'm on location at the Evan Williams Bourbon Experience on Whiskey Row in downtown Louisville, Kentucky. Coming up in just a few minutes.
We were all having a jolly good old drink in Mulroy's in Soho, which I'm sure you know very well.
Taste, Colin, taste.
Sorry. No, sorry. We were having a good drink, and we collectively wanted to do something in TV. These guys were filming already, doing stuff with wine, and I wanted to do something with spirits, and so the idea of the three drinkers evolved, and thank God, the next morning it still seemed like a good idea.
How many drinks were consumed that night?
Oh, goodness.
2.
Yeah, we'll go with 2, but it was probably a lot more than that.
Gallons.
It seems that Amazon Prime Video has discovered whiskey. Colin Hampton White, Helen Nicklin, and Adie Smith are the three drinkers, and the first season of their Amazon Prime series follows them around Scotland as the three drinkers do Scotch. While Fred Minnick has been doing the same with his new series on Amazon Prime, it's called Bourbon Up. We'll talk with all of them later on WhiskyCast in depth. I'll also have the calendar of events, your voice, the What I'm Tasting This Week department, and a whole lot more, all on this edition of WhiskyCast.
WhiskyCast, brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
From far beyond the wall comes a whiskey for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. Blended Scotch whiskey, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by Highland Park. And we can start with some good news out of Washington. There will not be another federal government shutdown, at least for the rest of this fiscal year. Friday, President Donald Trump signed the compromise spending bill agreed to late this week by congressional negotiators, and it includes full funding for the Treasury Department's Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau. In the 3 weeks since the last shutdown ended, TTB agents have almost cleared the backlog of label approval applications for distilled spirits. The current backlog is down to just 14 days. When the shutdown started in late December, it was at around 11 days. The agents handling label approvals for wine, beer, and other malt beverages have also made a significant dent in their backlogs as well. Meanwhile, the clock is also ticking until December 31st, when the 2-year temporary cut in federal excise taxes for distillers is scheduled to expire. Bills to make the cut permanent have now been introduced in both the House and Senate. Right now, distillers only pay $2.70 per proof gallon on the first 100,000 gallons of spirit they remove from bond for sale each year. After that, they pay the regular tax rate of $13.50 per proof gallon. American Craft Spirits Association President Chris Montana says 9 out of 10 ACSA members have plowed those tax savings back into their businesses by hiring new employees or buying new equipment, and a permanent cut would help boost the craft distilling industry. The move to make that tax cut permanent comes as we received the first concrete data on the impact of retaliatory tariffs on American whiskey exports. Last summer, the European Union, Canada, Mexico, China, and Turkey all imposed tariffs on bourbon and other whiskeys imported from the U.S. to retaliate for the Trump administration's tariffs on their steel and aluminum exports. This week, the Distilled Spirits Council held its annual economic briefing in New York City, complete with data showing a drop in exports during the second half of 2018 after the tariffs went into effect. Christine Lacascio heads up international trade programs at the council It says this is the most challenging period U.S. whiskey exporters have ever faced.
We saw a 28% increase from January through June 2018 compared with the same period in 2017. But that sort of follows the trend from previous years. We've seen this, global increase in interest in American whiskeys following what's happening in the U.S. and around the world, particularly in bourbon, Tennessee whiskey, and now rye as well. Once the tariffs were imposed, now that we look at the period of July to November 2018 compared to 2017, we're starting to see it flattening out and going into the negative range. So we're down 8.2% comparing the same period with 2017. So that suggests to us that the tariffs are starting to have a negative impact on our exports.
Essentially, the tariffs wiped out any gains in export sales for the entire year, as U.S. whiskey exports declined slightly for the 11-month period through November from 2017's $1.1 billion. Keep in mind that whiskeys account for about 60% of all U.S. spirits exports each year. Scott Harris of Virginia's Catoctin Creek Distillery also spoke at the council's briefing. Catoctin Creek has been exporting to Europe for the last 5 years, but saw almost all of its export sales disappear after the tariffs, including a deal that would have made its whiskeys available in the UK for the first time. While the tariffs may eventually go away if the U.S. and its trading partners can work out their differences, Harris said the damage to his export business could last for years.
In Europe, just like here in the U.S., there's an enormous boom in craft spirits and interest in that. And there is also a very high esteem for American spirits. And with American spirits sitting it out, so to speak, other spirits are going to fill that void. There are spirits producers making all categories of spirits, whether it's rye whiskey or corn whiskey, which you can't call bourbon, but it's corn whiskey from Germany. All of those categories are being made and addressed, and that gives them a chance to get into the market. And just like with the soybeans, once that market is gone, it's hard to get back into it. So we're really concerned about that loss of mind share and people drinking other spirit alternatives as opposed to American spirits.
As we reported earlier this month, the council received an $815,000 grant from the U.S. Agriculture Department as part of a program to help businesses affected by the tariffs. That money is being used to help fund export promotion programs worldwide. There was some positive news out of the council's briefing, with domestic sales of whiskey and other spirits reaching record levels for the 9th straight year. American whiskey sales grew by 6.6%, largely on the boom in bourbon, Tennessee, and rye whiskey. Irish whiskey sales reached the $1 billion mark for the first time, with a 12% increase, and Scotch whiskey sales also grew. Blended Scotch sales were up by 1% on volume, while value grew by 4.6% to around $1.5 billion on increased sales of high-end blends. Single malt sales were up 7.6% over 2017, with a value of $843 million. The U.S. remains one of the most important export markets for Scotch whiskey, and we saw that reflected in customs data that was also released on Tuesday. While global Scotch whiskey exports reached a new record of 4.7 billion pounds, the U.S. broke the billion-pound mark for the first time. The U.S. is the largest Scotch whiskey export market by value, while France remains the largest by volume, with the equivalent of 188 million bottles exported to France last year. That's 49 million more than went to the U.S. While those results are consistent from year to year, the Scotch Whisky Association's Graham Littlejohn says the real growth came out of developing markets.
Strong numbers, I think, and it builds off the back of record value numbers in 2017. And if you take market by market, there's some important growth as well. India up by 34% by value last year. That market continuing to develop despite the 150% tariff burden we have there. Singapore up by 10% by value last year, again pointing to strong growth across the Asian region. So really strong export figures for the industry, which we hope to build on in future years.
What do you attribute this to?
It's a bit early to tell in some markets. We want to do a deeper dive into some of these numbers. They've just been released by Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. The SWA will do a job in the next couple of months to look at some of the trends which are developing across our export markets. But I think the underlying strength of the Scotch whisky industry is at the heart of this. There's a growing trend for premiumization across spirits. That's not just involving Scotch whisky, of course, that's across other spirit categories. But there's a demand for Scotch whisky growing in some developing markets across the world. That's the underlying strength of our industry, and I think that's being reflected in the record value and volume growth.
Blended Scotch still accounts for about 75% of the global Scotch whisky market, but single malt exports grew by more than 11% during 2018. In other news, Diageo has completed a deal to acquire the former House of Fraser store on Princes Street in downtown Edinburgh, and the 7-story building will become the home of the new Johnny Walker Experience tourist attraction. Diageo applied for planning permission with Edinburgh Council this week. The project is budgeted at around $194 million and will include an immersive visitors experience, along with a retail shop, rooftop bars, and an events space. There's no timetable yet for the Council's review of that application. We'll have more details as they're available. Elsewhere in Scotland, Distell's 2-year-long renovation project at Tobermory Distillery on the Isle of Mull is in its final stages and should be completed this summer. Production at the distillery was shut down to allow for a complete upgrade program, along with the addition of a gin still and a new visitors center. The first new Tobermory expression in some time is on the way to mark the return to production. Distell's Derek Scott and his team have been looking at ways to update the whiskey lineup.
We've kind of been known for our 10-year-old for quite a long time, and the 10-year-old particularly, Ian McMillan did some work with that quite a while back, where we part of our overall development of our whiskies was to stop chill filtering it and bring it out at a higher strength, and that made quite a big difference to Tobermory. The spirit quality, took quite a big leap. However, I was doing some work with Kirsty, our current master blender, and we were trying a variety of different aged expressions, and she came to me with a very strong view that actually Tobermory just needed another couple of years for it to be at its its optimum. And so we tried a 12-year-old, and she, as ever, she was quite right. The 12-year-old Tobermory really made quite a big difference.
The new Tobermory 12-year-old will officially make its debut at gallery openings March 27th in London and April 3rd in Glasgow. Those events will feature artwork by Catherine Ross, who spent time at the distillery last year as an artist in residence. Tobermory also produces the Lechig peated malt, and Derek Scott says there will be several new limited edition bottlings coming over the next couple of years, while no changes are planned for the current 10 and 18-year-old core offerings. Other new whiskeys to mention, Douglas Lang & Company's streak of weekly whiskey debuts is unbroken so far this year. The latest is the 10th anniversary edition of its Big Pete Isla blended malt. It's bottled at 46% ABV and will be available in limited amounts in the UK, Europe, and Asia for around 65 pounds. That's about $84 a bottle. Jameson will be bringing out a new batch of its Bow Street 18 years old cask strength edition. The original batch made its debut last year and is the only Jameson expression that includes whiskey matured in the new warehouse that's part of the Jameson Distillery Bow Street Visitors Center in Dublin. You'll have to wait until August to get your hands on a bottle, though. It'll be available in 20 markets worldwide with a recommended retail price of €240 a bottle. That's around $271 at current exchange rates. MGP is expanding its in-house range of whiskeys from its distillery in Lawrenceburg, Indiana. 8 and Sand blended bourbon gets its name from the railroads. The 8 traditionally refers to the fastest notch on a locomotive's throttle, while sand has historically been applied to the wheels to prevent slippage on the tracks. 8 and Sand will be available in 12 U.S. states for around $30 a bottle. And Tennessee's Sugarlands Distillery will put its next batch of Roaming Man Straight Rye whiskey on the market starting this Friday. That's pretty good timing, especially since Roaming Man took Best Whiskey honors in the American Craft Spirits Association's annual awards that were announced this week. The latest batch will be available for pre-orders starting on Friday through the Sugarlands website. There is one other ACSA award to mention. Middle West Spirits in Columbus, Ohio won the Innovation Award for whiskeys with its Ohio Sherry Cask Finished Bourbon. The ACSA added innovation categories this year for spirits with flavor profiles that, as the description puts it, may stray from their category's signature notes. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com. The news is brought to you by Highland Park, the Orkney single malt with Viking soul. If you're not a member of the Highland Park Inner Circle, well, what are you waiting for? An invitation? Here it is. It's the fastest way to get details on exclusive Inner Circle releases, contests, and all the latest news from Orkney. Best of all, it's free. Sign up today and check out the entire lineup at highlandparkwhiskey.com. Time now for the WhiskeyCast calendar of events. If you're in the New England area, don't forget about the Julio's Liquors Go Whiskey Week events starting on Tuesday and running through this coming Sunday in Westboro, Massachusetts. This coming weekend also brings the Whiskey Show Old and Rare in Glasgow, Scotland, and the Uppsala Beer and Whiskey Festival in Sweden. Tickets are still available for Whiskey and Barrel Night on the 27th in New York City. The Winnipeg Whiskey Festival is March 1st and 2nd in Winnipeg, Manitoba. The Fife Whiskey Festival is the weekend of March 8th through the 10th in Cooper, Scotland. The Newcastle Whiskey Festival is March 16th in Newcastle, England. And I'll be in Cornwall, Ontario again this year for the Wonderful World of Whiskey show, March 21st through the 23rd. Whiskeys of the World San Jose is on the 21st, and in San Francisco on the 23rd. Right now, we have 204 different events on the searchable calendar at whiskycast.com. If you have a festival, tasting, or other whiskey-related event coming up, just use the contact form at our website to let us know about it, and we'll be glad to add it to the list.
From deep in the north, far beyond the wall, the howl of the frozen wind brings word of something new. A whiskey from the land of always winter, for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. Blended Scotch whiskey, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
WhiskeyCast In Depth is brought to you by Lagavulin. Once again, we're on location this week at the Evan Williams Bourbon Experience in Louisville, Kentucky. But you don't have to leave your living room these days to get a taste of whiskey culture. We've been doing WhiskeyCast HD videos online for years now, but Amazon Prime is now offering 2 new streaming video series for whiskey lovers. We'll talk with the 3 drinkers, Colin Hampton White, Helena Nicklin, and Adie Smith in just a few minutes. But first, we sat down for brunch today with our good pal Fred Minnick and his family. Fred's new Bourbon Up series made its debut on Amazon Prime in the U.S. and the UK recently.
Bourbon Up is an extension of Bourbon Plus magazine. One of our big strategies is to have like a film arm, and we have a Bourbon Plus digital film series that'll be rolling out online. The first episode will be Independent Stave Company, and then Amazon Prime is kind of a talk show style in which I sit down with interesting guests. We drink bourbon and we just talk about stuff. I like to think of it as like this is like where the Bourbon Hall of Famers are, and give bourbon an opportunity to kind of be on like a mainstream platform like Amazon Prime, so anybody with Amazon Prime can find it. Our first season has Aaron Sanchez, a celebrity chef, who's on Fox, and we had David Byrne from the Talking Heads, but we shot it all at Bourbon and Beyond, and I made the decision not to include that because my pants had gotten all wet. So you could see, like, it wasn't a good look on TV, let's put it that way. But it was a great interview with him. I also got Mindy Bear, who is the Grammy-nominated saxophonist, and probably the most important interview, one of the most important interviews of my career, with Dave Pickerel. And it's a 20-minute interview with him in which we talked about his legacy. And I swear, Mark, I think he knew he was about to die, because he was talking about his legacy and how he hoped he's remembered in that interview. And a little bit more than a month later, he passed away. So I've always cherished my time with Dave Pickerel, but that interview was special for me, looking back on it, because it was I think it was my best interview of the whole series.
I remember having a talk with him at Bourbon and Beyond, and talking about a lot of those same things. And we were just sitting there in the press tent, just sitting there sipping whiskey and talking about it. And I think we all miss him. And I don't know what the legacy is going to hold for him yet. I know that there is at least some interest in getting him finally where he should be into the Bourbon Hall of Fame this year. But it's a shame that it would come after we lose him.
Well, I think the Bourbon Hall of Fame is very much is something that he should have been in. I think he's probably been in those discussions every year, but the fact he's not associated with the brand that's in those discussions, I think probably hurt him. But it was only a matter of time anyway. I mean, I hope he's on that. I hope he's there now. But his legacy is as simple as, like, I have people who come to me all the time and say, "Hey, we want to start a whiskey." For 10 years, I sent them to Dave Pickerel. Who do I send him to now? I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of people out there who are consultants, but there was only one Dave Pickerel. That man could do everything, and he was special. And in that interview I had with him, he also told me the number on my palates, like what everybody thinks of like my palate, and like what people think. And I told him I didn't like his a particular whiskey, and we just had this nice like back and forth. And what I loved about Dave is I could tell him I didn't like his whiskey, and you wouldn't start seeing the vein throb in his neck. You could have a very collegial, professional conversation with him, and I don't know if I can have that with anybody else now. There's just not a lot of people like that.
A lot of people, if you tell them you don't like their whiskey, it's almost like you don't like their kids or something like that, because of the emotional attachment that whiskey makers have with their whiskeys. But I think even Dave would have probably admitted that he didn't like 100% of the whiskeys he made. They were good, solid whiskeys, but he wouldn't probably have preferred every single one of them over the years.
Yeah, I think that's correct, and he has his own story. He had his own story connected to each whiskey, and but I've had distillers who set me down and yelled at me for an hour because of a review I've done. I've had them take me off their press release lists, and Dave was never that way. He respected you for you, and that was him. And one thing I found very interesting about Dave, and it came out in the interview with him for Bourbon Up, is that he had this incredible ability to tell a story that anybody on earth could relate to. And he was a master distiller, every bit of it, through and through. But man, he was a great storyteller.
That he was. Speaking of stories, what are we going to see in season 2 of Bourbon Up, and when will that season go online, if you haven't started shooting it yet?
I actually have landed a very major celebrity, Oscar-level celebrity. I've got confirmed the Voltaggio brothers, the legendary, iconic chefs, and Jim Cantori, the weatherman, has confirmed with me, and a few others we've got on the we're working on, but trying to get high-level guests who really just want to sit down, drink some whiskey, talk about their lives.
How'd you wind up doing the deal with Amazon to get on Amazon Prime? Because not everybody can get on Amazon Prime that easily.
Well, my production partners are line producers for Amazon, and so they have their company's called Northwoods Collective, and they basically film a good chunk of the high-end outdoors films that are out there. Like if there's a really high-end outdoors film, that's their niche, and they're likely behind it. So they have the ability to get us on that. We could have chosen to pitch it to Netflix, but Amazon Prime accepted it as is. So we're streaming in the United Kingdom and United States.
Can't let you go without talking about Bourbon and Beyond this fall and the new Hometown Rising Festival the week before for country music lovers that we've talked about. There's been some changes since, obviously, those who listened last September will recall that the second day was rained out because of severe rain and floods. I know you just announced the Hometown Rising stars that are performing this year on the countryside with Danny Wimmer Presents as the promoter, but what's been done to fix the flooding issue?
It moved venues. Hometown Rising and Bourbon and Beyond will be at the Expo Center in the area we're calling the Highlands Grounds, and it's a very large area, so it's going to be great for parking, great for transportation. There's a lot of hotels around there, so people can just walk back and forth. We have 3 festivals. We have Hometown Rising, which our headliners are Tim McGraw, Luke Bryan, Little Big Town, Dwight Yoakam, which I think is a fan favorite for this state. A lot of great artists. That'll be September 14th and 15th. The next week is Bourbon and Beyond. Our headliners have not been announced, but I'm just telling you, they're awesome. And then the week after that is a hard rock concert called Louder Than Life. And you can get a trifecta pass where you can go to all 3 of those festivals, and you can transfer it to somebody. And Hometown Rising and Bourbon and Beyond will both have culinary and bourbon workshops, that I'm curating. And we're also going to have the Big Bourbon Bar will be back. There'll be some other new amenities that are on site. The Hunter's Bar, presented by Silver Dollar, will be back. My mini bar will be back. So there's going to be a lot of great bourbon-soaked fun at these 3 festivals. It's going to be incredible.
And we are sitting in the Silver Dollar Whiskey Bar on the east side of Louisville. What is it about Louisville that just leads itself to great little bourbon, almost dive-style bars like this?
Well, it's funny because if you try to force bourbon in Louisville, like let's say you're a restaurant downtown or the east side, you just put up 80 bourbons. If you don't have that culture, if you don't know what you're doing, it won't matter. No one will sit their butt in your seat if you just put bourbon on the menu. You have to embrace the culture in Louisville in order to succeed. Nobody, you walk into the Silver Dollar, they got vinyl playing of old country music and old rock. They've only got 1 vodka on the well. The walls filled with bourbons and ryes and some mezcals and tequilas. And you know what they're serving? The comfort food. They're serving great biscuits and gravy and chicken thighs. So they're not trying to go do too much. And it's an everyday man's place. And that's what really works here. When you try to do too much in Louisville, it kind of sucks.
And we have links for details on both Hometown Rising and Bourbon and Beyond at whiskycast.com. Now, if you've ever watched the BBC's Top Gear, you have an idea of what Three Drinkers is all about. Colin Hampton White, Helena Nicklin, and Adie Smith launched their series recently on Amazon Prime as well. Season 1 is The Three Drinkers Do Scotch, and I caught up with them recently in London. Who came up with the idea for this show in the first place? Who wants to take that one?
I can take that one, I suppose. It was one of those things that we really don't quite know. We've been friends for ages, and we were all having a jolly good old drink in Mulroy's in Soho, which I'm sure you know very well.
Taste, Colin, taste.
Sorry. No, sorry. We were having a good drink, and we collectively wanted to do something in TV. These guys were filming already, doing stuff with wine, and I wanted to do something with spirits, and so the idea of the three drinkers evolved, and thank God the next morning it still seemed like a good idea.
How many drinks were consumed that night?
Oh, goodness.
2.
Yeah, we'll go with 2, but it was probably a lot more than that.
Gallons.
The next morning when you realized, hey, this is still a good idea, who took it from there and actually managed to get this thing put together and get it onto Amazon?
I've got to say, Colin took the lead on this. We all were very, very happy to get involved with it immediately from the off. But Colin knows a lot of people in Whiskeyland, and so he led it, to be fair.
I think I was also pushed on by the others because we realised that we wanted to make a programme fairly quickly and not do it like traditional TV. Go to a production company, spend lots of time pitching, and it may be in 2 years' time you get your cameras rolling. We wanted to do this now. The time was right, especially for Scotch. So we thought, okay, how can we do this a different way? And the best way was to get the Scotch brands involved and to get them to be able to help us make it. And that's how it happened.
I think one of the things to mention here is that, we're all journalists. We've worked in the journalism world for a wee while, shall we say. And so we've made friends over the years in the whiskey world. We've made friends in the wine world. And, it allows us to be able to talk to the right people, share our vision with them. And, they're on board because they get that it's nice to have something new in the wine and spirits industry, which has a lot more fun to it than has previously been out there. So we call it, we say 0 pretense, 100% edutainment. It's entertainment with edutainment, and I can't even remember, education and entertainment thrown into the mix. It's a bit of a tongue twister.
But now there's 2 of you that do wine primarily, and Colin here does spirits. How come you guys did Scotch whiskey for the first one?
Well, very good question. Actually, we're all wine. Colin, annoyingly, is the chairman of the Circle of Wine Writers. But whiskey, it was ripe, it was ready to go. We'd been reading a lot about how the industry was just booming, not just here, but in the States and everywhere else around the world. And it's like, we could do this right now. Wine takes a long time. So we thought we'd start with whiskey. And Colin was right.
Yeah, I mean, for me, although, yes, I've got connections within both the wine and spirits world, my closest connections are with whiskey. It's my passion. And I knew that the brands would, well, I didn't know actually, I hoped that the brands would buy into the concept that we had. And I luckily was right and had a lot of help from these guys as well. I mean, they're all putting it onto me here, but no, really, it was a collective effort to go to the brands, tell them about the show, see if they liked it, see if they wanted to get involved. And they did. And luckily, they wanted to get involved now.
And I think one other thing to add is that at the beginning of this process, we were originally meant to go out to just 4 countries on Amazon. We are now in 167 countries in 39 different languages. So it's gone from that on day 1, 7 months ago, to 7 months in the future. We had the series live, and we were in that many countries. And, we hope that when people watch it, it allows them to take their whiskey discovery from on screen to actually experiencing more in person. Going out and buying that whiskey they wouldn't have otherwise bought, or thinking about going to Scotland to embark on their next kind of travel adventure and experiencing it for itself.
Yeah. And I think that is testament, the fact that we thought we were going to go into 4 and now we're in 167 is testament to how whiskey has taken the world by storm, but also why we're onto something, I think, because of our wine interests collectively and the way we it's the questions that we wanted to ask. It's people who drink a lot of wine but bringing them around to whiskey. I think it worked quite well, the fact that we have that dynamic. We have wine, but we have whiskey, and we're asking each other questions.
I think also purely from a business point of view, Amazon's a business. And if they see a show that they like, they're going to push it. So originally, they said, okay, we can do this for you. However, they obviously like it enough to have pushed it as far as they possibly can. I don't think that they would have done that had they thought the show was not for their audience. I mean, it's clearly, it's clearly for the right audience.
I think one other thing to point out is that we are all very different people as well, so we all attract in different audiences. If you look at me, I'm the youngest of the group. I'm the kind of young millennial, so to speak, who's by somewhere. Well, no, you're all young at heart, aren't you? And then we've
Rude.
got no. And then you've got Helena, you've got Colin. We're all very different people, and so we do all bring something completely different to the table.
I'm going to ask Helena, what does Colin here bring to the table?
Oh, he brings a danger warning, to be perfectly honest. I mean, you know, I did have a hair and makeup person, just saying. Didn't have her by the end of the series because she was driving Colin's car. No, but but on the plus side, no, Colin has brought massive expertise to this. This one particularly, which is fantastic. He knows a lot of people. Now we know a lot of people, and it was just a lovely way in to the proper side of whiskey that we've really enjoyed.
I would say just on that hair and makeup point that I knew we were going to Scotland. I knew we were going to be drinking a lot. So yeah, I insured the hair and makeup girl for my car so that I didn't actually have to drive that much. I thought it was a perfect solution.
Sat in the car with about 2 drams in a bottle in the passenger seat while the poor Catherine, our wonderful makeup lady, did all the driving. And I drove the hero car for most of the time as well because Helena was a bit too scared, weren't you?
And I was orange and had terrible hair.
So what did we not get to see in the first season? What got cut out that you sort of wish... And Helena's cracking up laughing over here, so I got to ask, what got cut out?
A lot. I don't know if I can say because it's not in there for a reason. Sorry.
Let's just say that the camera was accidentally left on in the car once when someone was getting checked. That's not going in.
Yeah.
Colin, right?
Well, let's just blame Colin. No, you don't want to see dashboard cameras when you're changing in the car.
Funny moment was when we were just coming off the motorway and we pulled into the little rest stop area and we had a really fast costume change. So there we are outside the car getting changed as all these cars are going by tooting their horns. We got quite used to getting changed in front of a lot of people, didn't we, during that show?
Yeah, we did. There's also a really lovely moment where the traditional Scottish mozzies came out as Adie was changing in the middle of a field whilst we were filming in it. And yes, there's footage of Adie running around a car, half naked, being chased by mosquitoes.
That's good.
Helena got attacked by a swan too. That didn't come out. That was quite
well,
deadly.
I know. I had to wrestle. Well, I didn't. I had to get someone else to wrestle a bottle of Ardbeg back from a swan on Isla, which was, interesting. Wasn't expecting that. Didn't make the cut, though.
No, it didn't. But yeah, we were trying to take a lovely picture of said bottle of Ardbeg in the seaweed, in the rocks or whatever, and the swan thought it would take ownership of the bottle. It took a long time to get that bottle back.
Swan has good taste.
It certainly did.
So what are we going to see in season 2?
Very good question. We do have 2 in the pipeline that we're going to definitely be doing hopefully this year, and there are a lot more after that. All we can say at this point is wine will be involved, other drinks too, spirits and some other things, but yeah, there will be a wine focus. We can't say just yet.
When might we see you come over to the U.S. and do something, go do the Bourbon Trail?
Well, that is a very good question. You know what? We will, and we are planning something along those lines, but we cannot say more right now.
But on the serious note, with the States, there is so much in the States that it's quite difficult almost to grasp how much there is and how can we bottle it, if you like. Wine. I mean, God, if you went to California, there are so many great spirits in California. Yeah. And, of course, there's Napa and Sonoma, and then there's Ridge and there's Santa Cruz. I mean, there is so much. So it's trying to actually just organize that into a coherent program that the consumer is going to understand and enjoy. And then, gosh, you go north in the States now. And there's just so much. We will be doing the States, though.
Even on the East Coast as well. I mean, there's so much in terms of distilleries, and then you've got the wine trails going up north in New York. There's a heck of a lot. It's quite exciting because there's also so much diversity there as well. It's not just a one-trick pony. There is truly so much going on.
Now, I referred to this when I ran into Colin earlier tonight as the Top Gear of whiskey. And you're just doing a fist bump here, practically, Helena. Is that a fair comparison?
Well, we'd like to think so. Obviously, we can't say that, but just what we've always loved Top Gear. What we love about those guys is it's genuine mates having a little bit of a talk. They all know stuff, and everyone knows they know stuff, but it's not up its own bottom. You still learn, but you don't watch it for that. But you learn anyway, and it's great, and they've done incredibly well. If anyone wants to describe us as that, we'll be very happy.
We all learnt from Helena that in Scotland, near Glenmorangie, there are transsexual oysters.
What's that got to do with Top Gear?
Well, you said people know things, so I was just saying something that you knew. Oh, and Top Gear.
I don't even know where to go from there, so we're just going to close this. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
Of course, you'll find both The Three Drinkers Do Scotch and Bourbon Up on Amazon Prime. And that's Whiskey Cast in Depth, brought to you by Lagavulin, the legendary Isla single malt. Look for the new House Lannister Lagavulin 9-year-old. It's part of the Game of Thrones single malt Scotch whiskey collection from Diageo and HBO. Look for it at a whiskey shop near you, and check out the rest of the Lagavulin single malts at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. Angel's Envy released its limited edition Oloroso cask-finished bourbon this weekend at the Angel's Envy Distillery, just down the street from here. It's bottled at 50% ABV, and the nose has notes of dried fruits, fresh berries, hints of caramel, brown sugar, and vanilla. The taste is thick, fruity, and nectar-like at first. Then the spices kick in with touches of clove and white pepper, balanced nicely by caramel, dried fruits, and honey. The spices linger nicely through the finish with hints of dried fruits, honey, and caramel. It's a different take on Angel's Envy, and I'm scoring the Oloroso cask finish bourbon a 92. Brown-Forman recently released the Barrel Reserve edition of its Cooper's Craft Bourbon. It's bottled at 50% ABV, much stronger than the regular Cooper's Craft, and it uses barrels with grooves that were chiseled into them to get more wood into contact with the whiskey. The nose is aromatic with touches of caramel, molasses, honey, vanilla, muted spices, and a touch of charred oak. The taste is thick, chewy, and spicy, with touches of black pepper, cinnamon, and vanilla, along with hints of honey and caramel in the background. The finish has lingering spices balanced by touches of honey and cocoa. I'm scoring the Cooper's Craft Barrel Reserve an 89. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, our tasting notes are brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. 85 years ago, as the end of Prohibition meant a renewed demand for Kentucky bourbon, Ed Shapira and his brothers invested in a new distillery in Bardstown. They bought out their partners later on. Today, that little startup is the largest family-owned and operated distillery. Get the entire history at heavenhilldistillery.com. Think wisely, drink wisely. Westland Distillery in Seattle held its annual Peat Week celebration earlier this month, and the 5th annual release of its Peat Week single malt is bottled at 50% ABV. The nose has a subtle smokiness along with touches of vanilla, straw, and dried flowers. The taste is smoky with caramel, vanilla, and a good pepperiness that builds up slowly with just a hint of honey in the background. The finish is long with lingering smoke and spices, and I'm scoring Westland's 2019 Peat Week release a 92. Finally, I received a sample of the latest Compass Box release. Stranger and Stranger lives up to its name. While almost all of the Compass Box whiskeys are blended malts, this one is technically labeled as a spirit drink. That's because John Glazer and his team added some 1-year-old grain whiskey spirit to the blend, so it can't officially be called a whiskey. It's bottled at 46% ABV, and the nose has a nice balance of woodiness and spices, along with hints of vanilla, sandalwood, and red apples. The taste is sweet and malty with touches of barley sugar, honey, allspice, white pepper, and creme brulee. The finish is long and sweet with just a hint of spice. Don't be fooled by labels. This may technically not be a whiskey in legal terms, but it's still a damn good whiskey. I'm scoring Compass Box's Stranger and Stranger a 93. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. I'm adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of nearly 2,500 different whiskeys from all over the world. You'll find it at whiskycast.com.
Redbreast fans have always cherished our whiskey's sherry notes, so we set out to embellish that character. Introducing the Redbreast Listowel edition, a quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey finished in first fill Oloroso sherry casks from Spain's prestigious Bodegas Listowel. Carrying Redbreast's trademark pot still spices and dark dried fruit notes, the Listowel edition is graced with an enduring sherry finish that would be better described as a final act. Discover the newest branch on the Redbreast family tree.
Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice. It's presented by Lot 40. I was at Heaven Hill's Bernheim Distillery here in Louisville on Friday, just as they were filling up a fermenter with a fresh batch of mash, and shot some slow-motion video of it at 240 frames per second from right at the end of the feed pipe as the mash spilled into the fermenter 60 feet below. Now, you can see this video on our social media feeds, and it did bring a lot of comments. At Bunkai H tweeted, "Good shot on this. I feel like I need 3D glasses." Lenny Eckstein at Colorado's Deerhammer Distilling, at Deerhammer on Twitter, added this: "Pretty much everything, in all caps, in whiskey production is about slowing down. Watching it in slow motion feels about right." And if you're looking for something to do on a Friday night, go on Twitter and search out the hashtag Friday Night Dram. There are a bunch of whiskey lovers, most of them in Ireland, who use that hashtag on Friday nights. Bianca McDonough at Carlow Tours in Ireland summed up my thoughts perfectly on Friday night with this tweet: "When I drink whiskey, it's for scientific reasons only, analyzing it by color, smell, and taste. A hard task." Which led to this response from at David Mara: "Scientific research is the backbone of modern civilization. Far be it from us to hamper scientific discovery by drinking less whiskey." Sounds perfectly logical to me, and it's just proof that sometimes you can find intelligent conversation even on Twitter. If you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always get in touch with us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at WhiskeyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your Voice is presented by Lot 40, Canada's award-winning 100% pot still rye whiskey. Lot 40, unapologetically Canadian. Please drink responsibly. Let's close things out now with Behind the Label, our look at the science, history, and other stories that make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. Last week, the Kentucky Distillers Association reported record visitor numbers for the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, with more than 1 million visitors during 2018. 2019 marks the 20th anniversary of the creation of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. And yes, the general idea of whiskey tourism is a relatively recent phenomenon. But as with many things in life, whiskey tourism isn't anything new. I sat down with Bourbon Hall of Fame member and longtime whiskey historian Michael Veach this weekend here in Louisville to put things into perspective.
I really think that Colonel E.H. Taylor Jr. was kind of the birth of bourbon tourism. It's interesting. You see, he started life in the banking industry in the 1850s. After the war, he gets involved with a company called Gainsbury and Company. He was the company in Gainsbury and Company, and they had bought the Old Crow brand. So they send E.H. Taylor, being the youngest and junior partner, over to Europe to learn everything he can about the distilling industry. So they sent him to Ireland, Scotland, England, France, Italy, Spain, Germany. And he comes back and he applies that knowledge to help them build the new Hermitage distillery to make Old Crow. In 1870, he goes one step further and buys a distillery on the banks of the Kentucky River in Frankfort and rebuilds it as the OFC distillery. And he builds it with the idea of tourism in mind. He wanted people to come visit. Now, in my opinion, where he got this idea it was over in Europe, but it wasn't from the distilling industry. It's from the German beer industry. In the 1860s, beer tourism in Germany was big. And I think he got the idea, if beer can do this, why can't we do that with whiskey? Because I don't think the Scotch industry was really doing it at that time. And I know that because when I asked Nick Morgan about it, he goes, well, I'll have to check into this and get back to you. He never got back to me. If it was true, if they were doing it then, if he got this idea from the Scotch industry, I'd have heard from him. So he started building the OFC distillery, real nice modern brick warehouses, brick distillery, beautifully laid out, made to where you could walk through and see every step of the process. Of course, he gets into financial trouble and he has to sell that distillery. But he does manage to get bailed out. He gets back on financial strength long enough that he had still had one small distillery that they had called the Jacob Swigert Distillery, Jacob Swigert Taylor Distillery. That's his oldest son. And they took that and they turned that into the E.H. Taylor and Sons Old Taylor Distillery. And he started rebuilding that distillery into a showplace, making the distillery look like a European castle, putting a very European-looking sunken garden in next to it, with another very European-looking spring house there and everything. And the whole idea was tourism, to get people to come visit his distillery. It wasn't on the same scale as we see it today, but it was beginning. The idea was beginning. Of course, it was snuffed out by Prohibition.
Mike Veach's 2019 series of bourbon salon events at Louisville's Oxmoor Farm gets underway on April 9th, featuring an evening with some of Kentucky's artisan distillers. We have all the details at whiskycast.com. If you have something you'd like us to look at on Behind the Label, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copper Pot, an 18th century style of premium Irish whiskey, blended from single pot still and single malt. Like yourself, it's one of life's treasured rarities, and what's rare is wonderful. Writer's Tears Copper Pot.
That's all for this edition of Whiskey Cast. Once again, we're on location this week at the Evan Williams Bourbon Experience on Whiskey Row in downtown Louisville, specifically the cocktail bar on the 3rd floor. And thanks to Carla and all the staff here for making us feel right at home. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com, along with links for our WhiskyCast HD videos and the WhiskyCast Tasting Panel podcast. We also have the latest whiskey news, the world's most complete calendar of whiskey events worldwide, tasting notes, and much more, including a complete archive of all of our past episodes going back to 2005. I hope you'll take a minute this week and share WhiskyCast with your friends. If they're not podcast listeners, please show them how to use that podcast app on their smartphone to discover a whole world of free content. Remember, friends don't let friends miss out on podcasts. We'd love to hear from you. Look for us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
From far beyond the wall comes a whiskey for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. Blended Scotch whiskey, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
Whiskey Cast. Brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
Whiskey Cast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2019, and comes to you most of the time from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. But this time around, we're on Whiskey Row in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.